Pleasure to be here today from the comfort of our own homes. Let's start with introductions. So my name's Lee Fout, so I'm a careers consultant with the Open University and sort of very proud to have worked there now for 4 years. I'll just let my co-presenters and colleagues introduce themselves as well to you.
Thank you very much, Lee. So I'm Lynn Johnson. I'm the Learning and Professional Development Manager at the Open University Careers and Employability Services. I used to be one of the careers consultants there, linked with the Faculty of Business and Law, and I moved into this role about 3 or 4 years ago, part of the quality team. And over to you, Lydia.
Hi everybody, I'm Lydia Lauder, also at the Careers and Employability Services at the Open University. Oh, and I've worked in adult careers for about, too long now, 20 years, I'd say. But delighted to be with you here this morning and looking at this topic together. Back to Lee.
Great, thank you. So we're going to be talking to you today about delivering high quality email guidance. This is a subject sort of very close to our hearts. So as a career service at the Open University, we interact with all our students via distance. So that can involve telephone calls, webinars, forums, but also email guidance. And of particular interest to us is delivering high quality email guidance. So what we're going to talk through to you today is our experiences of email guidance, our expertise, but also the very preliminary findings of a recent research project that we've all been involved in since, well, it seems like a really long time, but certainly since September 2020. So quite a long time really that we've been looking at email guidance, and we want to, share some of those findings with you today. But before I do that, in the kind of spirit of the title of our research, which is You've Got Mail, sort of say hands up or in the chat box, who remembers the film You've Got Mail? So this was the kind of inspiration really for our title. Not necessarily the inspiration for our research, I might add, but certainly the idea actually that email has been certainly like a mature technology for a number of years. So if we think about the Meg Ryan, Tom Hanks film back from 1998, which seems, a long time ago. Email, I guess, in this really nice situation. I remember it being a novelty to me. Didn't have the internet in I remember things starting going into internet cafes as they were a thing.
Yeah, Lee, we can't hear you for some reason. You've gone really quiet. Yeah, the sound has dropped off for you.
Can you hear me now?
Not really.
I'm just going to click some buttons, see if that makes a difference.
We can hear you now.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Don't move.
I didn't even press anything, and
right.
It's come back. I'm back in the room. Apologies for that. I promise I didn't click anything. Just regaling really the story of email is certainly a mature technology now, but back in the day in the early 90s, it was certainly exciting. I guess the question really for you and us was, well, has email, has it been overtaken by various social media platforms now? What use is email guidance in our practice? So that's really the question that I want to position to the participants and you today, really. Do you use email in your guidance practice? Well, let's see. So with your device, whatever that is, if you want to head over to menti.com, then please use the code 7244-8727, and then we're going to go and have a look at the results. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen a second. Okay. So hopefully you should be able to see the menti.com screen. You can see the question there. I currently use my email guidance practice in. And we'll just leave this just a minute just for you to submit your vote. And it's quite encouraging that actually we're not seeing people use it not at all, which is really encouraging. 3 people at the moment, occasionally for simple information and advice. 8, 9, regularly for simple information and advice. 2, occasionally for complex guidance, and 2 regularly for complex guidance. So that's really heartening, actually, that nobody's in the not at all category. And certainly not just for purely administration or CV. So it seems like most people are sort of in the mid-range categories, if I want to call it that, so that they're using it for occasional simple information advice and regularly for simple information advice. So people seem to be, by the looks of things, in the middle categories. Okay. Right, let's get us back. Right, I'll load the presentation back. So thank you for completing that. And again, really encouraging actually that people are using email guidance. So this session should certainly be of interest to you. So the outline that we're going to work with you today then is, well, firstly, we want to explore your perceptions and experience of email guidance. So from an experience perspective, it seems like some participants here have some regular experience of using it, certainly for information and advice. We're going to talk through some of the advantages and disadvantages and actually some of the inherent challenges of email guidance that we found. We're going to present some of the summary of our HEXU research findings as well. And also tell you, well, what next for our research, and actually what next will that mean for you as well. So in terms of giving you some background then, in terms of the research, as mentioned at the OU, our professional careers guidance services are all delivered at a distance. So our students are spread out all over the UK and actually all over the world. So we utilise various technologies to reach students, such as webinars, forums, video, and of course, email. So email guidance is actually a core part of our one-to-one offer. But what our research uncovered, and actually our experience uncovered as well, is that the efficacy, effectiveness of careers guidance via email is very much less understood than, let's just say, face-to-face. So there's a limited evidence base for it. So we really wanted to better understand as well the training and the quality assurance needs to be able to deliver high quality email guidance. So the question is it the same? Is it the same set of tactics and approaches and skill sets for the practitioner? So we explored the evidence, we explored the gaps in the evidence base, especially involving practitioner and client experiences of email guidance as well. So what's going on for us and what's going on for them? So we did this through questionnaires, some in-depth student interviews, and a practitioner focus group to really sort of deep dive into that. So at the moment, we're at the stage of, we've got our data, we've been analysing it, we've got some draft findings, which we're going to share with you, and we're pulling together our draft report right now. So the evidence base then, thinking about sort of Swiss cheese, what we found was actually the evidence base has some rather large holes in it. There's a large body of evidence towards guidance models and theories for guidance and interview models. But a lot of that is assumptive on face-to-face contact that we found. So it tends not to actually assume different sets of competencies between different modes, whether that's email or webinars or face-to-face. There's no recent literature on email guidance, so the kind of last really body of research that we found was from 2004. there's much more evidence of email guidance in a therapeutic context that we found. So, for example, in a counselling setting. And there's more useful recent evidence of the value of writing for career. So narrative approaches, storytelling through career construction. So hopefully that sets the scene really in terms of some of the evidence base for our research and some of the things that we did uncover. I'm now going to hand you over to Lydia to talk about exploring the advantages and disadvantages of email guidance.
Okay, thanks, Lee. So we're going to look a little bit more deeply into the disadvantages first of email guidance, and then we'll present to you some of our findings both on the disadvantages and the advantages of email guidance from a practitioner perspective. But I think what you'll really be interested in is actually the end user perspective as well. So what did our students who received email guidance and who also participated in our telephone interviews, when we compared the data against each other, what did our findings tell us? But first, I want you to do a little bit more work. So we're going to go to a Padlet. So if Lynn, if you don't mind just putting the Padlet up for us.
Yeah.
Thank you. So she's going to put the link in the chat. And I'd like you to just have a think about what's difficult about careers guidance by email. So most of you do use email for information and advice, as you've told us on the poll already, whether that's occasionally or regularly. But what are the challenges around delivering careers guidance by email? So if you just want to pop it on the Padlet, that would be great. Just 5 minutes or so on this. Yeah, tone, absolutely. Detail. I can't quite see the writing underneath, actually. Lynn, I don't know if you can. Length of content.
So getting the information you'd like to use without thinking in person. Keeping it concise and to the point, and the ability of clients to express themselves in writing. A lot about the time it takes, how time consuming it is. Things coming in really fast, so visual cues, not being able to pick it up. And the power dynamics, that's an interesting one, can feel one-sided. Visual learners, I use a lot of visual aids with face-to-face guidance, and that's quite difficult with email, and clarity and zeroing in on the important issues. So a number of things there.
Lack of body language is another one there as well. You don't have the client sat in front of you. So how do you communicate with sensitivity when you can't read what that person's saying through their body language? Delay, yes, timing is a big one in terms of the asynchronous nature.
Yeah, I can see there the facts versus assumptions, that it's just, you can't really check things out perhaps, so it's easy to just make assumptions.
Context could be taken the wrong way, absolutely. So we might mean something when we're communicating, but how is it read by the recipient? How do they interpret that information, and vice versa? We might be misreading what the client is telling us. Fantastic. Just a minute or so. Takes too long, time to actually construct an email. So again, the asynchronicity of that medium is a barrier, can be a barrier.
Should we stop?
Okay, lovely. Thank you very much, everyone. So we go to the presentation and we'll tell you actually what the challenges were from our practitioners focus group. So just to give you a bit of context, So when we asked our practitioners what they found difficult about email guidance, we had a group actually of really experienced practitioners within our focused group, but they varied in their length of experience in delivering information, advice and guidance across the different mediums. In fact, 75% had a background working predominantly in face-to-face settings, and telephone delivery far outweighed email experience. In total, I think we had 80 years of face-to-face compared with 17 years of email. And this meant that practice in telephone advice and guidance was mature, whilst e-guidance was less well developed. So it was a call really, as you can see on that picture, to jump out of their comfort zones and advance their e-guidance practice. So really, what were the issues that made those jumps difficult? What was difficult about careers guidance by email for them? And the first one was contextual concerns and transferring those e-guidance skills to a digital medium. So some of the things you've already told us, for example, checking assumptions and the expectations of the students, going beyond what's actually the presenting issue, what was written on that initial email, and checking whether the student wants guidance or information and advice only. So you can see in that little quote there, the presenting issue isn't the real issue. With an email, you're not going to get beyond that, are you? It's really difficult to get beyond that. Ask those digging, challenging sorts of questions that are really hard to do by email. So the presenting issue might not be the real issue. And then there'll come no surprise to you that contracting was considered particularly difficult by practitioners. For example, expressing those kind of legislative and technical elements around confidentiality, safeguarding the service offer, you know, it felt very clinical for our practitioners, and it tended to slow them down when they were trying to do that on an email. And then agreeing the agenda for the interaction. So as you've said on the Padlet, how do you prioritize what to talk about when you don't have that person sat in front of you? How do you know if they've got deeper needs which need to be prioritized than that which they have presented on the email? And actually, how much time does that all take to get to a place where you're agreeing a clear agenda based on diagnosed needs that can be agreed between you and the client? So in that quote there, I'm sorry it's small writing, but I'll try and highlight it for you, is it says, if a student writes a very long email and we spot so many different elements to that email, we don't want to bombard them with even more stuff by opening things up. So we have to make choices to say which ones we are going to possibly work on. Whereas if I did it on the telephone, you could say that to them, that you've brought up a lot of things here. What's your priority? It's so much more quicker to do it on the telephone. But on email, you can open up a floodgate, and that's actually quite difficult to do. So 3 challenges there. If we move on, Lynn, please. And then fourthly, anxieties over e-guidance, relating to something we call the theory of mind considerations. You might have heard of that. Or theory of mind is really the ability to make inferences from what the student is saying. So what are their intentions? What are their motivations? What are their beliefs? And in terms of communicating effectively. So not just focusing on the content of what they're saying, but noticing how they're saying it, the way they're saying it, and the ability to infer what's going on in their person's head. And some of you mentioned body language. Well, of course, you know, you don't have the client sat in front of you. 80% of communication is through body language. You can't do that via an email. And then you also mentioned tone within Padlet. Tone of writing. How do you express sympathy? Do you use intention statements, a bit like emoticons, to try and prefix what you're going to say? And really, practitioners found this difficult, partly because it was not what they were used to, partly because email's asynchronous and in its nature, and partly because it needs a new set of skills. And you can see that in that quote there, that, you know, you find that as though you need to understand better what the student is thinking when you were having a conversation with them, as opposed to when you're trying to do it cold through an email. And then fifthly, technical writing skills, as well as kind of the personal thinking process that's involved in constructing an email, posed barriers. So there is an art to writing. There's actually, as Lee mentioned, a therapy in the act of writing, particularly for the students, and thinking things through and talking things through with the student sat right in front of you feels much more of a collaborative and efficient approach, rather than trying to do it on your own via the email, as it were. And again, a quote there, email actually feels really difficult. The process feels harder and a lot more effort. I think on the phone, you're in that zone, you're in the moment, you're in the conversation, it feels a lot more natural. But when I'm emailing them, I really probably overthink things a bit, because you're having to write it down and then sending it off to the student. It feels like a lot more effort. Whereas I think if I could just have a conversation, it would have been so much more easier. And then there are, sixthly, attitudinal reluctance. So that lack of confidence and the lack of taking a risk when you're trying to undertake email guidance. So there was a sort of default preference for telephone guidance by our practitioners. So again, that quote highlights it there. I'm less likely, I think, to risk in email guidance, particularly asking those challenging questions. I haven't got to the stage where I confidently do that by email. So we've got a picture of eggs there. You can't come up to Easter without having some eggs. So, you know, very different sets of emotions. And I think it's adapting a mindset for changing your practice. And we know that that takes time. Developing a mindset for adapting your practice does take time. And it wasn't helped when we looked at the research and the body of evidence that was out there, that email delivery had not often been classified as a distinct activity within advice and guidance frameworks. And so that focus on additional skills is often overlooked. So sometimes even sort of the professional bodies had clumped all the skills together, and we need to change the skills continuum. We can't just clump technical skills, but we need to adopt perhaps a differentiated model and recognize the unique set of skills that are needed in addition to core IAG skills, depending on what medium you're delivering guidance through. We also need organizational, sectoral, and behavioral and cultural change around this if we're going to hone our e-guidance practice. Thanks, Lynn. Next one, please. So, the advantages of email. So those were some of the challenges. What were the benefits? So I'm going to look at it from two perspectives. One is what our practitioners told us, and the other is actually what our students felt were the benefits of e-guidance. 5 advantages for each, 5 for practitioners and 5 for students that I'm just going to highlight. So the practitioner focus group, interesting, as I mentioned, that even though 75% of our practitioners preferred to deliver over telephone than email, had much more experience in telephone or face-to-face interventions than email, 100% of them cited positive perceptions of email guidance. All of them noted advantages, and actually 50% of them noted superior advantages to email than over the telephone. So those advantages, the key themes were: first, more space and better pace during email guidance. That allowed them time to reflect, a greater degree of autonomy, and a kind of reflexivity associated with the process, with it being asynchronous. So it helped them to gauge a deeper understanding and engagement with the guidance process. And interestingly, not only practitioners, but our students also spoke about email providing that psychological space for interventions. Secondly, there's greater agency for the student and better engagement with complex LMI. So when they visually constructed the email with sophisticated information, built in the links and the resources within that email package, it was viewed as being helpful to assimilate that information and support the student's career learning. And just the highlights within that quote there, complexity of information. You know, when you're on the phone, you're mentioning resources, you're pointing them out to such and such resource, it can get overwhelming for the client or students. Whereas if you set it out in an email, it still looks complicated, but you can go through it bit by bit, one at a time. And this person sharing their experience, I was speaking to someone and going through a potential career plan the other day for them. I could tell they were quite confused on the phone because they were saying, I want to do this, or if that happens, then do that. But when I sent the email, I set it out as step 1, 2, and 3, like a kind of flow chart, and that was a lot easier, really. So greater agency in terms of deciphering that complex information by setting it out clearly on an email. Therapeutic benefits of writing to support the student's career management, development, and identity. I think particularly beneficial in the context of a series of interventions or that journey model, an email continuum model, rather than a one-off email. So real benefits to actually the writing process itself, both for the practitioner and the student. Fourthly, for students with anxieties and certain disabilities, such as social anxiety, shift workers, international students, email guidance was considered much more beneficial than telephone. And then fifthly, reflective and professional practice was amplified through the delivery of email guidance, deemed to be one of its greatest benefits. So in addition to that psychological space, practitioners mentioned, as some work by Mandahar and Offer shows us, that growing space that helped them to develop their practice as well. So 5 clear benefits for practitioners. Let's move on to the students or the clients who experienced email guidance. So as I've mentioned already, time and psychological space to respond. So students told us that it gave them time to think about their responses, what they wanted to say, and then being able to go over and over again over it until they've actually honed it down to what they put down on that communication, particularly for students for whom, for example, English wasn't their first language. They might have struggled to communicate in that way over the phone, but it allowed them time to think and put it down on that email. And also a sense, I think, that the student might have self-managed their journey much more in an email, and helping them to discipline their own career learning and career thinking process. Secondly, email provides that aid memoir to support ongoing career planning and management. So it provides that kind of permanent learning record, that learning artifact for that student to refer back to, because they can research it in their own time. They can go back and check the information. Greater autonomy and agency. Actually, a couple of our students said how it felt that the email had given them a sense of greater control when they're communicating by the email. They didn't feel rushed, that they would have felt perhaps over the phone, perhaps on the spot to respond. They didn't feel that as intimidated in order to accept what the consultant might be saying to them, or disagreeing if it felt awkward. So it helped them to give them more independence in terms of their decision making and the sense of controlling their career planning and management as well. And fourthly, practical conveniences. So international students working on sociable hours, are not working 9 to 5, or are working 9 to 5, don't have a 45-minute slot in their day to undertake a telephone or a face-to-face consultation. So email, again, removed that barrier of time and space. It gave them the control of the time they can choose to respond. And then there was a practical issue, actually cost of calling from abroad, which was avoided when they chose to communicate by email. And then finally, email overcomes the barriers of verbal communication. So, you know, if you're having a disability such as hearing loss or mental health conditions such as social anxiety, email help to supersede those issues. And we also have to remember that, you know, different students will have different levels of understanding, different experiences of the guidance process. For some, it will be a new process that they're entering into the first time, and they may not have undertaken it for a long time ago. So that there is a sort of psychological danger of that pressure of being asked questions on the telephone or managing expectations when being presented with a real-time conversation. So email provided them that real safe space for carrying out those careers interactions. So some real advantages, both for the end user as well as practitioner in terms of email guidance. So what else did our research tell us? Over to Lynn.
Thank you very much, Lydia. So my role at the Open University Careers and Employability Services is learning and professional development. So in undertaking this research, my real interest was really what does it mean in terms of professional development around email? And I think Lydia's really made the case there that that to do e-guidance well, there's perhaps a new set of skills that need to be developed that maybe most of us didn't develop during our original training, and there's an assumption that you're just going to develop it as you go along. That actually the exact same skills you need for face-to-face or telephone are the same for email. But I think what our research shows is that there is a case that there are additional skills needs, and what we have certainly seen with the practitioners at the Open University is that there has been a difference between email practice before the introduction of quality standards and workshops and training around e-guidance, and that's still very much a work in progress. We're still seeing development of skills through observation process and peer reviews. So there are certain skills, and what we're going to look at here is perhaps just 4 areas to consider. I mean, this is really very much just food for thought, and hopefully in the future we'll be able to do a little bit more in this space. So the first thing really is contracting, and I'd say that contracting is the heart of any good guidance, and that might be contracting about the kind of confidentiality and the ethical side of the service that you're providing. But I think more importantly, in a sense, is also contracting about the kind of service you're providing and how you're going to work together with that student. In our research, we found that those who had selected telephone interviews as their preferred medium for guidance often did so because they assumed that careers guidance by email would be really a lesser offer, that they thought that if they went for the email guidance option, what they'd be buying into there was that quick shopping basket around the corner shop, that quick dash that would just perhaps be that information and advice response to their question, rather than perhaps that larger trolley shop at a big major supermarket that's going to touch all the bases that they perhaps need that kind of personalized response. So there was really a misapprehension that email guidance would not be perhaps that communication with one practitioner, but maybe more of a service response with a number of practitioners providing that response, and that the answers to that question would be very much a cut and paste response, a rote response, rather than that personalized response to their situation and their needs. So I think the first point to consider is that you need to consider how you're going to communicate those expectations about the service you're delivering to the student, how that is going to work, that there is going to be that journey approach, that there is going to be exploration before the provision of an answer to their response. And are you going to do that up front when they're kind of buying into that service, or are you going to do it at the start of your email as you start to contract? So move on to the next slide. So the importance of following a guidance model, and this came up really strongly, and what we saw in our research is where a guidance model is not followed, the information and advice that is often provided by email, and I won't call it guidance at that point, it's often information advice, was actually not helpful for students, and in some cases was actually left students feeling less confident because the information that was provided to them just missed the mark in terms of what their needs were. So it's likely you have a preferred model when you're interviewing clients face to face, and that probably also translates to when you're speaking to clients over the phone. But what about by email? And if you actually mapped your email guidance against that framework or model that you use, how would that email stand up? And that's something we did across the service. If you use docs, for example, it's quite straightforward. What are you doing to explore that self-awareness or opportunity awareness in that email? If you're following Egan or a Coventry 3-stage model, how thoroughly are you attending to that stage 1 and helping the client tell their story? Are you using active listening, those deep listening skills, to kind of hone into the words? Are you responding with empathy and reframing? Are you checking assumption? I think with email, it's really easy to go with that presenting issue, and although you might ask one question, maybe to feel like, yes, I've asked a question, you're not actually fully exploring it. And so you then send a barrage of information to cover every possible eventuality, because you're not really clear what the students looked at, what exactly they need. You've not taken that time in that first email. So I think information without fully exploring what the student needs is not helpful, and that really came out strongly and leaves the student often less motivated and perhaps more confused than before they started. So next slide. I think incorporating action planning, in our research, we had a small telephone sample with students at 3 months after their original interactions. And one of the things we wanted to look at is progress at that 3 months. Was there a difference between students who had had a telephone interaction and those who had an email? Was there more progress? What we did find is that perhaps students who'd had email might have been less clear that there were actions set, and that there were a number of actions. Where good action planning was evident in the email, the student was much more likely to follow through with the actions and progress. And what that might mean in practice is actually building in a summary and action points at the end of each email. So that might be using bullet points, perhaps, to summarize what you've covered, and key points, key action points at the end. And where those action points are coming from you, just recognizing that in the email, saying these are just some suggestions as to what you might do next, some things that other students have found helpful, and actually taking the time to invite the student to respond, ask them, what will you do next? What are your steps going to be next? And you might be surprised how they come back to you. Can you go on to the next slide, Lee? Okay, I think the biggest one is really the development of guidance skills. Most of us are trained for face-to-face delivery, and all practitioners in our focus group had never had any training around effective guidance. Writing is really what you need to be good at. And it's clear from the focus group with practitioners that this takes time. So some top tips is write in a conversational style, and it might take you a while to develop that sense of your own persona in writing, and for that to actually come through to the reader. Personalize your emails. Don't use templates or copy blocks of text. And where you're doing so, be explicit to the student that I'm just copying this in, and that's why. Don't, be transparent about what you're doing. Perhaps use quotes from the original message to create that sense of interaction, and use intention statements or method of communication to reveal the emotions. So this is where you're perhaps taking that risk or challenging. How do you do that effectively? So Lee, over to you.
Okay, so what's next for our research, and also what's next for you? So great to see your thoughts and your reflections, and actually your creative ideas on delivering email in the chat. So do keep posting them in there in terms of perhaps some key takeaways from what you've heard from the session, as I just talked through what we're going to do next with our research. So if we can just flick on, please, Lynn or Lee, thank you very much. So as we mentioned that, a number of our practitioners had actually changed their perceptions of email guidance as a result of the training that we delivered. So we are first of all going to complete our analysis of the research and hopefully, all being well, get it published by autumn 2021. So we'll be able to produce the full report and share that with the sector at that time. And in terms of the training resource, the training had a real positive impact with our practitioners. And as part of that package, we have actually developed an e-guidance quality standards framework. We've also developed a Richter skills style self-assessment. So practitioners can actually see where their strengths, gaps are, and the development needs are. So we've actually utilised a lot of the underpinning evidence base for this in terms of physical, technical guidance, social, personal, and cognitive category skills categories, and so practitioners can self-assess in terms of where their development and training needs are. We've also got an e-guidance checklist to help practitioners with key elements to think about when you're constructing an email, and I know our practitioners at the OU print it off, have it on their desk, and then just go through it as they're developing their email. And then we've also, to support all of that, actually developed a quality assurance framework, including observation standards just focused on email. We're hoping to develop all of that into a portfolio within a full training resource in the future, and really ultimately to develop our confidence and our unique identity as e-guidance practitioners and experts in terms of delivering via the e-guidance medium. So that's it from us. If you want to get in touch or want to know more, we'd love to hear from you. Please contact us via email or look us up on LinkedIn. So thank you.
Great, thanks for everybody's time and attention, and for taking an interest in what for us is an ongoing project that we're going to be really excited to share the full results with in due course.
Thank you, everyone. Great, well done. Okay, I'm going to...
Should we go out?
Yeah, I'm going to leave. Okay. Bye, everyone.